collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, the former head of the World Trade Organization was in Cyprus, and when I met him, he said we must make adjustments if we're to harness globalisation.
And if we agree that we now are in a situation where there is a tension between economic integration on the one side and political integration on the other side, we have to address this tension.
The head of the United Nations peacekeeping force in Cyprus has emphasised the importance of including women in the peace process.
If we invest in women in peace processes, and if we work also towards gender equality and overall equality in a peace agreement, then we have a much greater chance of success.
We hear about an event to enlighten the public about rheumatic diseases.
There are a group of conditions that affect primarily joints, but not necessarily the musculoskeletal system and other parts of the body.
And a photographic exhibition entitled Cyprus My Way opens next week in Tala.
It's not like a painting, but it has a bit of a painting appearance.
The former director of the World Trade Organization, Pascal Lamy, was in Cyprus last week to deliver the Cyprus Economic Society's annual lecture in economics. The topic, harnessing globalization, is of course interlinked both with the digital revolution and the way that business is conducted these days across the world. It has far-reaching implications for all parts of society, government, business of course, and individual citizens. The first globalisation era, some say, has come to an end and showed a slowing of global growth and productivity. The next globalisation era offers great promise, but of course also what are called potential disruptions. The global economic order, as we've known it since the end of the Second World War, will have to adjust. So I asked Pascal Lamy to explain how he thinks that adjustment can take place.
Well, first, I agree with you that an adjustment has to take place. What we've witnessed in the recent decades is a globalization which has become stronger, deeper, and which has impacted economic and social systems everywhere on the planet, mostly in the West in terms of winners-losers, in a way that hasn't been buffered the way it used to be buffered previously, i.e. with welfare systems. In other words, globalization has become stronger, and our capacity to harness globalization, notably in addressing this winners-losers equation, has become weaker. So something has to change. And if we agree that we now are in a situation where there is a tension between economic integration on the one side and political integration on the other side, we have to address this tension. And my basic point is that if we want to avoid in the future a choice between globalization and democracy, and my view is that we should avoid this choice because globalization is here to stay. What has powered globalization is technology. Technology will not move back. Globalization will not move back. It may slow a bit, but it will not move back. Then we have to address the core of the problem, which is to make this globalization more fair. And this is, in my view, what harnessing globalization means in the future. And we have, in order to do that, to rewrite part of the story, part of the legal and political frame, whether at global level or at national level.
Yes, because I was going to ask you about this disparity, if you like, between the developed and the developing countries, which seems to be getting bigger as globalization progresses.
I'm not sure the inequalities between countries are increasing. If you look at the numbers, inequalities between countries are decreasing. Poorer countries are becoming less poor, and economic development overall is leading to a reduction of poverty. That being said, we also witness a situation where domestic inequalities are increasing and where big issues like climate change, for instance, may also add to the sort of normal Ricardo Schumpeterian impact on social and economic systems. So we have to try and address this. We have to create a better capacity, a better global capacity to make this globalization more fair, and this has to do with international regulatory systems in trade, in investment, in taxation, in environment, in health. And then we have, and that's, in my view, the largest part of the problem, we have to adjust our national systems so that old welfare systems, which we inherited from the 19th and the 20th century, adjust to the new reality, including, of course, this big digital revolution in empowering people with a capacity, an individual capacity, to cope with these permanent transformations. It's a different welfare than the one we invented in the 19th century in Europe and in the US.
You mentioned climate change. Now, a lot of people think that that could force huge migrations in the not-too-distant future. That surely will have an impact on this globalisation model, because as desertification takes place in some areas, people will move to where they can still work. What impact do you think that may have? I know we're looking a little bit speculatively to the future, but if it happens, it's surely going to have an effect.
Well, the problem is that it's already happening. The environmental degradation of the planet is not something we have to fear for the future. It's happening.
Yeah, but the migration that follows it.
The migration that follows it is already happening. If you look at what's happened in Africa, which is the place on the planet where there is the largest number of forced migrations, it's already happening. So the question is not whether, it's how do we address this? And the only way we know that, insofar as we can address it for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, is to limit emissions of CO2. We have an international agreement that was brokered in Paris in 2015. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has exited it. The good news is that California or many US businesses have not exited it. But this is something that, we need to cope with. And it's a typical issue which cannot be dealt individually, nationally, domestically, where we need an international framework. We have it. The problem is that most of the experts believe that even if we were to do what we all are committed to do since the Paris Agreement, this would only address part of the problem, which is the 1 to 1.5 increase in temperature, which already, take Africa, take the Pacific Islands, for instance, already is creating big problems.
Other problems, of course, are with the trade tariffs and barriers that are going up in many areas. Now, I think you worked on the Doha Agreement, and that was aimed at reducing those barriers to international trade. You mentioned Donald Trump. Well, he seems determined to take on pretty well everybody else and create more barriers. Is that going to have an effect, not just politically, but also on the sort of trade that all countries can do?
Oh, I agree with you that that's what he seems to be determined to do, which is wrong. Whatever economic theory you have in mind, there's a vast consensus that protectionism does not work, simply because protectionism does not protect the ones you pretend to protect when you use protectionism. Now, the big problem is that if it's a middle-sized country that becomes protectionist, that's not a big problem. If it's the US, it is a big problem. So the question is, will and when Mr. Trump change his mind or move back, because what he is pretending he wants to do will damage, first and foremost, the US economy, and as a consequence, the rest of the economies. This is the wrong way to do it, which is why, by the way, in recent trade measures which he took against the EU, against China, against Mexico, against Canada, the others have reacted as they were expected to react, i.e., take the US to the WTO dispute settlement and initiate countermeasures in order to push back, because this is the wrong road.
So what about China? That's a huge growing economy. I know it's slowed a little, I think, in the last few years, but just in sheer numbers, the potential for Chinese growth is surely still huge. Could they become the new powerhouse of the global economy?
Well, that's not a question for the future. This is already the case. If you look at the numbers, of course, the Chinese economy is less deep than the US economy. You've got many more Chinese, but they are still less rich than the US. But China has already become a major economic powerhouse. The problem being not that China develops. This is great for 1.3 billion inhabitants of this planet, which is quite a large chunk. This is great for everybody, because if China opens its economy and grows rapidly, this is good for the others. The problem we have with China is that we have not yet adjusted a number of world trade rules, which we inherited from the 80s and the 90s, but which do not properly constrain a number of Chinese trade practices, and notably in the area of subsidies, where the capacity to China to subsidize its economy without breaching the rules of WTO is too big. So we have a net of trade disciplines with the World Trade Organization. Some of the stitches of the net are small, and that's fine. Other stitches of the net are still too big, and these are the ones where the Chinese fish escapes the net of disciplines.
And
this has to be changed.
Is the WTO looking at changing that?
I think the time has come, and this is what, for instance, the French president said a week ago. It is time for these rules, which were adapted to the world of the 80s and 90s, to be adapted to the 21st century. This has to change, as, by the way, other rules which, for instance, have to do with the capacity to administer support for agriculture. So what is needed is not a reform of the WTO per se. What is needed is a reform, an adjustment, an updating of the rules which the World Trade Organization administers.
Finally, can I ask you about the European Union? You've been very closely involved with that over the years. I think you're still, to some degree, involved with it. And the integration that we planned for, if you like, seems to be not disintegrating, but certainly the stitches are coming apart, let's say, in some areas of the European Union. How far, as an economist, do you think that economic principles can bind those countries together again, or do we have to look at political integration?
Well, this is precisely the conclusion of my lecture at the Cyprus Economic Society, which is that EU, in many ways, if you look at the world as a whole, and this problem between economic integration and political integration, EU remains the only place on this planet where we seriously try to keep together economic integration and political integration. And that's something which is a major endeavor for the rest of the world. True, in some areas, we've had European crisis, notably in 2008. True, we have political tensions with some countries of the EU whose regime is becoming less liberal or more illiberal than it used to do. Overall, the good news is that for the last 2 or 3 years, support for European integration in European public opinion has moved upwards. Brexit may have a role in this. Mr. Trump, Mr. Putin, Mr. Erdogan may have a role in this. What matters is to keep enough support in European public opinion while recognizing that parts of European public opinion has turned anti-European. As long as this remains a minority, I think the essential is to keep moving in the direction of a simultaneous economic and political integration, as long as this is the case. And we will have a test of this next year with the European elections. But to go back to essentials, what's happening in Europe has a lot to do whether this world will or not succeed in re-embedding properly economic and political integration. In other words, for us, Westerners, globalisation and democracy.
And that is Pascal Lamy, the former head of the World Trade Organization, who was in Nicosia last week delivering a lecture on harnessing globalisation.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
On Tuesday evening, the Centre for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development, SEED, hosted an event at the Lydra Palace in the UN buffer zone in Nicosia. It was to share the findings of the Gender Score Cyprus research project. One of the keynote speakers was Elizabeth Spehar, Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General in Cyprus and Head of Mission at UNFICYP. When I spoke to her afterwards, she outlined her message.
I started out with a few remarks at the beginning of this event to underscore the intimate link between women's involvement and participation in peace processes and sustainable peace. I also made the link between gender equality and also having a successful peace process and a sustainable peace agreement. This is something that has been shown throughout the world in peace processes, that when women are involved, you have a much greater chance of getting a peace process that reflects the needs and the concerns of the society as a whole. And it also usually leads to a more durable peace, where the peace agreement that's being devised really reflects what people need and what they expect. So if we invest in women in peace processes, and if we work also towards gender equality and overall equality in a peace agreement, then we have a much greater chance of success.
It's something I know that you work for very hard here in Cyprus, and it's interesting that you're the head of UNFICYP. The recently departed head of the military side of UNFICYP was also a woman. We had a lot of women in positions of power here, yes. And it seems to have had an impact on the attitude of both the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots.
Well, I would hope that we did, in fact, in some small measure at least, contribute to that. I think there's a lot of great activity and a lot of growth in terms of the interest in the issue of gender and peace. So I wouldn't take all of the credit. I think there's a very vibrant civil society here, both among Turkish Cypriot women, Greek Cypriot women, and other women on the island, and men who also believe in this.
And that's
but I
important,
do think,
isn't it?
and
Because
it's very important, men also need to be
men
involved.
don't have a role to play.
No, not at all. To the contrary.
They're doing the same thing that has been done to women for years.
No, absolutely. But I would say that we do hope as United Nations to lead by example, and so myself being here as head of mission of a peacekeeping operation, also being intimately involved in supporting the negotiations as Deputy Special Advisor, our former force commander, a woman, Kristen Lund, and our current Senior Police Advisor who is in charge of all of the police component of UNFICYP. I'm hoping that we are, as I said, showing the example of what women can do, how they can contribute to peace, and how they can show the reality that we can have gender equality across the board in all fields.
Elizabeth Spehar, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary-General in Cyprus and head of the UNFICYP mission.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Last week in Nicosia, for the second time, I believe, there was a discussion, an event that was bringing to the public's attention the issue of rheumatic diseases. Dr. Joseph is one of the staff at the St George's Medical School in Nicosia. He's also a rheumatologist. It was your idea, I think, last year. It must have been successful if you're repeating it. Tell us what happens.
Yes, it's a rather innovative, if I may say so, event whereby in the second year of their studies, our medical students, in this 4-year course that we have, in their second year they have to do a project which is called their self-selected component. They choose a project, they may look at data, they may analyze statistics, they may work in an office or even in a laboratory. But there are some special projects which have got more to do with different ideas, the public, education in inverted commas or literally. And this is how we got the idea to basically assign each of the students a topic in rheumatology, and they basically practice and prepare and learn and deliver a talk to the public. Now this is very special because it's not talking to colleagues, it's not talking to their tutors, but it's talking to the people they will be speaking to in all their lives.
So I suppose
doctors.
It's quite important that they have the communication skills for a start to get their message across to the general public, but they've also got to know their subject, because I think you do questions and answers afterwards.
It tests everything. It tests their presentation skills, their communication skills, of course. It tests their knowledge of the subject. And we do have 1 or 2 questions immediately after the talk. There's 5 of them, and then lots of questions at the end for all 5 of them. So it can be quite scary for them, but of course we don't leave them alone, and that we don't leave them on their own. There is the moderator that would come in and clarify if necessary, but it's a great experience for them. And forever, something they hold with them, and I'm sure they'll hold with them forever, because they talk in plain language about these conditions.
And that's always important, to keep out the jargon, isn't it?
Completely.
Let's just look at the issues that were being discussed, because rheumatic diseases encompass quite a few different things. I think a lot of people don't really understand what they all are.
Yes, of course. There are a group of conditions that affect primarily joints, but not necessarily the musculoskeletal system and other parts of the body. And if we were to choose the 5 that we're talking about today, we have osteoarthritis, the one that affects all of us as we get older, the one that affects knees and hips and spines and our neck and our back and our fingers with a bit of stiffness and bony swelling, that sort of thing, the one, I repeat, that comes as we get older. Then we've got rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition. It means your own body by mistake is hitting your body. And it's a serious one. It can cause problems in other parts of the body. It can cause effects on the heart, on the lungs. And it's something that really needs proper, timely diagnosis and treatment.
And that can occur in much younger people too.
20 to 50-year-olds, especially women more than men, is the peak age group. Then we've got the so-called spondyloarthropathies, problems of the spine, and not only of the spine, like the arthritis you get when you have psoriasis of the skin, like arthritis you get when you get an infection. You can get salmonella and then you can get arthritis a month later. Weird and wonderful things, but not so rare.
And not so well known either.
Not so well known. And we have ankylosing spondylitis, the one that causes some people to be a little stooped forward with a stiff spine. Again, inflammation, not the ones that come with age, but ones that you get when you're young, because there's an autoimmune basis to it.
And what about the questions that get asked? Because the people coming to this presumably don't know a great deal about these conditions. Maybe they've come because they suspect they or a family member has one of those conditions. So it's, in a sense, a free consultation to find out what they should do.
It really does work like that. Apart from someone who just wants to come and tell their story and is not looking for answers, everyone else is really here to try and clarify if what they've thought is actually true. And it's a safe environment to do it, because no one will say whatever comes to their head. It'll be in a controlled environment. We'll be there to help. So people do get their answers. And we do have the last 2 conditions, if I may say. Lupus, which is very famous, of course, with a bad name. Not necessarily, but a bad name, of course, because it can be serious in certain cases. But of course it needs, again, timely diagnosis and management. And then the huge problem of osteoporosis, the weakened bones that break more easily, the silent epidemic. So we have picked the topics that really people are bothered about. They are the commonest in a way, and they have the biggest impact.
And I presume, since it's been so successful, there'll be another one next year.
We really hope so. We really hope so.
In which case we'll have to let people know beforehand next year so that
Definitely.
they can come and join you.
Definitely.
Joseph, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
A new exhibition is coming up shortly. It opens on the 15th of the month. And it's the work of someone who loves Cyprus, spent over 20 years here, and now comes back on a regular basis. She's well known in the Paphos area. Her name is Ina Kritiodis. Ina, do tell us about this latest exhibition, and welcome back to Cyprus.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Yes, I love Cyprus. That's what you said already, and I'm very much looking forward to the exhibition in Tala. It's the gallery J&J Artworks in the Tala Square, and it's called Cyprus My Way, and it's an exhibition about Cyprus photography. And I'm exhibiting lots of different photos, like 100 centimeters by 75 or even larger.
Huge photographs.
Yes, but you see especially the ocean. It is so huge, so it needs a bit of a bigger space on canvas. It's printed on canvas.
So how do you go about doing that? You take your photographs, and what's the methodology you use to actually get them onto the canvas?
It's a technique. It's a printing procedure that you take the digital photos and you print them on canvas. They just need, of course, quite a large resolution from the beginning. So, yeah, it's no problem to enlarge them even to 2 meters by 1 or even larger.
And I presume that if they're on canvas, that gives them a sort of texture.
Yeah, exactly. This is nice, I think, because it has this linen canvas texture, and so it's not like a painting, but it has a bit of a painting appearance.
You mentioned oceans, but is it just landscapes? What sort of pictures have you got in there?
It's landscapes, it's the ocean, is whatever you find in Cyprus, sometimes as well detailed work, like old doors or old windows, old houses, Cypriot and Turkish villages, and so on. The old life and the new life may be a bit shown in the photos.
Right, now it's opening on the 15th, Ina, and it's running for how long?
It's a week. The duration is a week. It opens on the 15th at 7 o'clock and it's running till the 22nd of June in the gallery in Tala Square.
Which is a very pretty area. They've done it up, I think, haven't they? So when you come back to Cyprus, do you spend most of your time taking photographs again?
Not most of the time, but a lot of time, yes, because I'm just absorbing Cyprus, and I feel very grounded in Cyprus. It's still my home.
But you do spend a fair amount of time now in Northern Europe. What keeps you busy there?
I'm running a little gallery and an atelier or a workshop on a small island in Lake Constance right now. So I'm busy with art, abstract painting and photography, and I'm doing this now the 4th year here in Germany too. So I never left the subject.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people are going to come and meet up with you because you made so many friends during your many years here, and they won't miss your exhibition opening on the 15th and running for a week in Tala. Ina, it's been a pleasure talking to you once again.
Thank you very much, Rosie. It was a pleasure to talk to you too.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.